Kalimera, and welcome to Stupid Ancient History, Stupid A-Level Greeks. The sun's shining, I'm wearing a toga, we're all trapped in our houses, and today we're going to look at part 2 of the Sicilian expedition, particularly the siege of Syracuse. Previously on Stupid Ancient History then, we've seen that this Sicilian expedition was already off to a bit of a shocker of a start for a couple of reasons. The first one was, it was risky. The Athenians were overstretching themselves, again, just as they'd done in Egypt in the First Peloponnesian War. Sicily was far away, they didn't know what they were getting into, they didn't have enough knowledge of the towns in Sicily, and they were convinced to go to war by Alcibiades. This is the next problem, that Alcibiades and Nicias, as we've seen, couldn't agree on a plan. The Athenians sent them with this very, very vague mission of to do anything that increased the Athenian interests there, which could have been anything. If it meant stealing a pig, it meant stealing a pig. They had no guidelines. The other massive problem that emerges is the guy whose idea this all is, the commander in charge, Alcibiades. As soon as he sets foot on Sicilian soil, he's recalled to Athens to answer charges about fiddling with statues' bits, and rather than fess up to his crimes if he did them or clear his name, even more shocking, he does one and runs off to Sparta. And this doesn't help the situation in Sicily. The Athenians and their allies have to delay any attack on Syracuse, which is the main town they're after. This is the big Peloponnesian ally. They have to delay their attack until spring, which gives Syracuse ample time to send letters and messages for help, to wear down the Athenian morale, and also it gives Nicias, who's now in charge, more time to rethink his plan and decide, yeah, this really is a bad idea, and I was right all along. So in the early spring of 414, the attack on Syracuse finally gets underway. Over the winter, the Athenians had received more cavalry as reinforcements and 300 talents of silver to help them pay for their troops' wages, but also any mercenaries they're probably going to need. And the first step they do is the Athenians take control of the heights of Epipolae. This is a plateau just north of Syracuse, and it gives the Athenians a strategic viewpoint and advantage over the people in the city. From this initial starting point, they start to build siege walls. These siege walls will not only protect their camp, but they'll try and cut off the Syracusans to other Sicilian towns by land. They're trying to wall them in. Now, the Syracusans obviously are not too keen on this, and they start to begin their own defences, their own counter walls. Now, these walls, it's like a massive game of Snake. These walls ultimately start moving north, and they're trying to get around the Athenian siege walls. If they can get to the end first, they can make sure they can protect and access to the mainland of Sicily. If the Athenians get there first, the Athenians can cut the Syracusans off in terms of contact by land. Now, to make sure this siege does work, the Athenians also park their not insignificant fleet in the harbours surrounding Syracuse, although the Great Harbour particularly is too large for them to effectively blockade it off permanently. So the grounds are set on either side. In the early stages of this conflict, however, the Athenians come up against more problems. So, the attack on Syracuse doesn't just involve a lot of digging and building walls. There is some fighting at the same time. This is usually over walls and who controls the walls, but there is some actual conflict. And in one of these scraps, the Athenians try taking a section of the Syracusans' wall. They see the Syracusans are making too good headway, they may effectively beat them to the end. They try and attack the wall and destroy it. Now, during this attack, Lamachus, who's the other leader of the Athenian force, the guy who was sent to mediate between Alcibiades and Nicias, he is cut off from the rest of his troops, from the rest of his force, and he's challenged to single combat by a Syracusan, and he is killed, and the attack fails. This now leaves Nicias, who is certainly feeling more and more unwell as time goes on. We believe he has a quite significant kidney infection. He's definitely not in the best of moods for fighting, so he's left in sole charge, and he's effectively commanding this siege from his sickbed. After this initial contact, however, the Syracusans, seeing that the Athenians are starting to mean business, desperately send for aid from the Peloponnesian League. Nicias, also not too pleased that Lamachus is dead and the Syracusans aren't rolling over, he writes to Athens asking for more troops or, interestingly, permission to abandon the campaign. Don't forget, as we saw in the Sicilian campaign part 1, Nicias didn't think this was the best idea. He wanted caution, he thought it was a fool's errand, and Alcibiades was simply glorifying himself. This, it seems, does not go away once he is firmly stuck in Syracuse and doing the fighting. Into this, the Peloponnesians are the first to respond, and even though they don't send a huge force, they do send one of their biggest badasses to command this little force, and he also has one of the most difficult names to pronounce. This is Gylippus, or, as some people have pronounced it, Xiphus, or even worse, Gylippus. I don't know where we get that from. I've always called him Gylippus. Gyros is a gyros rather than a gyros, so Gylippus it is. So Gylippus is a bit like a Brasidas 2.0. He is not a king, who Spartan kings should be leading the armies like Aegis, but he's a Motharchy or a Mothax. Now these aren't even true pure-born Spartans. Mothax or Motharchies are usually from either non-Spartan families, particularly Perioikoi or other Laconians, or in his case from a family who was being disgraced. Gylippus's dad was involved in some corruption to do with Pleistonax, but he was allowed to go through the Agoge by gaining a sponsor from elsewhere in Sparta. One thing we can definitely say about him and his upbringing then is that he's definitely a bit of a determined scrapper. So he's sent to Syracuse to help the Syracusans, and he sneaks his ships and his whole army and his soldiers past the Athenian blockade like a boss, partly because the Athenians, it turns out, are rubbish at blockading, especially around Syracuse, but he manages to sneak his entire force past them. And as soon as he arrives, his reputation clearly precedes him. His arrival instantly boosts the Syracusans' morale and their will to fight. Now they've got this ultimate badass Spartan commander on their side, things are looking up. It's interesting, it also really panics the already less than enthusiastic Nicias and his allies. So as soon as Gylippus lands in Sicily, he wastes no time about getting things done. He is there to defeat the Athenians, and that's what he's going to do. So he starts by gathering further reinforcements from around the rest of Sicily, which again can just point out just how poor this Athenian siege is if this Spartan commander can just go for a mooch to gather new troops and bring them back. Once he comes back to Syracuse, so he starts a three-pronged offensive. Prong 1 is he sets about refitting the Syracusan navy. Now we'll come back to that later on. The second prong is he continues building the counterwall. He does not want to be cut off, so they continue with this process of building walls. Just to add insult to injury though, a lot of the walls he builds are built with stones that the Athenians had cut from quarries but had been captured. So Gylippus is building these walls against the Athenians with their own stones, just to really wind them up. Now, with this there follow a series of night attacks that he organises. We said it's not just building walls. And interestingly, he chooses to attack at night, which was always very, very risky. And the first time they do this, they try and take a piece of Athenian wall, and this does not go well. They're inexperienced at fighting at night, but Gylippus takes it all on the chin. He blames himself. He has a speech to his men claiming it was his strategy that had failed, but he now knows what to do. so they have a second, more successful attack on these walls, and they are able to take a good chunk of these Athenian siege walls. Now, this is really important because this prong of the attack, this taking the walls, now allows the Syracusans to cut across the north section of the Athenian wall. If you look at the map, it's the little bit that crosses at a right angle from their original wall, and in this, as they build this, they're able to build 3 defensive fortifications. So this is really key. This effectively means the Athenians cannot cut the Syracusans and their allies off from the north. So the siege is even less effective. There's this protected entryway into Syracuse. So this really starts to panic Nicias. So the building and taking and defending of walls takes up the rest of 414, and it stretches right to the north. By 413 though, the focus shifts to this first prong we discussed. The conflict moves to the sea. So throughout 414 and into 413, the Athenians had been blockading the Syracusan Great Harbour. Admittedly, it wasn't a great blockade because Gylippus was able to sail through with his entire force, but this needed to be dealt with. So in the coming of spring, with the better weather, less storms, the Syracusans sail out into the Great Harbour to meet the Athenians. Now, the Syracusans and Gylippus knew from the start they were no match for the skill of Athenian sailors, and they knew their triremes were nowhere near as fast, sleek and manoeuvrable as the Athenian ships. Don't forget, the Athenians had spent the best part of the century perfecting naval warfare, becoming the masters of the sea. This is what their troops were trained in doing. They were able to put more money and effort into building these ships. They had the best, arguably one of the best navies of the century. So the Syracusans, knowing they couldn't match them equally in this type of conflict, decided to do something different. And they took an idea that the Corinthians had started to use and started to adapt in their experiences of fighting the Athenians. The Syracusans now started to reinforce the front ends of their ships, the rams, and putting extra bracing behind them, effectively taking the long, sleek, pointy bit of the trireme that allows them to go faster and making it stumpy. Making it stumpy, boxy, harder to row, admittedly, but a lot stronger at the front. Now the whole point of this is that ships built in this way, with this bulky, stumpy front end rather than the sleek, pointy end that the Athenian ships had, they are much better equipped for ramming another ship on head on. So ramming, ram to ram, head to head. The Athenian ships are more intended to ram into the side of a trireme, so they don't necessarily need all the bracing, all the support. It's simple physics. The pointy brass ram will cleave through the stretched out wooden sides, but if they're forced to ram another stockier, stumpier ship head on, they will come into significant damage. If not, it could buckle the entire front. The Syracusans know that in this narrow space of the Great Harbour, they will be unable to outmaneuver the Athenians. They do not want to become Xerxes' fleet at Salamis, so this is why they make the adaptations. All they effectively have to do is sail out from Syracuse and head on to the Athenians and just hit them. They don't have to worry about trying to manoeuvre around the side. And in the ensuing battle, many of these sleek, fast, fancy Athenian warships are damaged by the stumpy Syracusan triremes. Now, as exciting and important as this naval battle can be seen, and it was important to stop the Athenians blockading the sea routes to Sicily, you can argue that this was simply a distraction. This was all just part of Gylippus' cunning plan. Now, as soon as he'd landed in Sicily, the Athenians had built 3 forts on the southern tip of the Great Harbour at a place called Plemmyrium. This is a good example of just how panicked Nicias was, and he wanted to make sure further reinforcements couldn't slip past the clearly quite shoddy Athenian blockade. So whilst the naval battle is going on, many of the Athenians in these fortifications decide they're going to go down to the beach and they're going to watch what's going on. Because, it's exciting, the battle is clearly at sea, no one's going to hassle them in their fort. So while they're on the beach, catching some sun, cheering along for the battle, we can guess what happens next. Gylippus and his land forces surprise them completely, and they're quite easily able to take these 3 forts with limited conflict. And although the naval battle is indecisive, there's no clear victor at sea, although there is damage on both sides and more damage on the Athenian side. This action is hugely decisive, and it's important. It now means the Athenians are not only cut off from the north, but now from the south. The Syracusans control the great harbour and the small harbour, and worse than that, the Athenians are now forced to move their camp into a swamp, and that's not going to end well. So after the Athenians lose these 3 forts, it looks like the Syracusans are about to seal the deal. The Syracusans can taste victory, the Athenians are on the ropes. But this is where it all steps up again. Now, unfortunately for Nicias, rather than him allowing to retreat and abandon Sicily, because the Athenians have already invested so many men and so many resources into this, they decide they're going to send their own world-class badass. This is Demosthenes. Now, Demosthenes is a man of significant reputation at this time. He is the guy who took Pylos and Sphacteria from the Spartans. He took those Spartan hostages. He achieved the unachievable, securing land in the southern Peloponnese and getting Spartan hoplites to surrender. So his reputation is significant. Wherever he goes, people know who he is. This will give the Athenians a massive boost. He also brings with him a whole bunch of new, fresh troops and a lot of cash to pay existing troops. So he turns up quite spectacularly with this massive force. And as soon as he gets there, he gets straight to work. He looks at the situation that Nicias is allowed to develop, this bit where the Athenians have taken a siege and managed to make it to the point where they are being besieged. And he uses these new troops he brings with him to retake the heights of Epipolae and take back the highland. And initially, the fact that it's Demosthenes and the troops are fresh and they're ready to fight and they're well trained, there is initial success with these shock troops. But this ultimately is lost when Demosthenes himself tries a night attack, and Thucydides describes it as a bad idea. It's not ideal for hoplites. And the Athenians then are now forced back from the heights of Epipolae, from their original fortifications, and once again they're back in the swamp. So we now move into the final stages of the siege of Syracuse. A lot of this now is recorded in Thucydides' book 7.71, and arguably this is some of his best kind of war reporting. His description of battle is almost uncharacteristically exciting and definitely worth a read. Now clearly, after these 2 failed Athenian attacks, Gylippus is much more confident. He's just defeated the great Demosthenes, so he uses this to his advantage, and again he sets off around Sicily to bring more troops to his course, to bring more allies to Syracuse. After these 2 failed attempts, though, it seems that even Demosthenes is convinced that the siege is unwinnable, that Sicily should be abandoned, and all is lost. But before they can actually make any headway into doing this, there is a lunar eclipse. Now, this lunar eclipse is interpreted by the various priests and seers attached to the Athenian army as a very, very bad omen indeed, and they forbid travel or significant movement for 27 days because they fear the bad omen. Turns out it is a bad omen, but that they should have got moving quicker. In this 27 days, obviously, this gives time for Gylippus to bring his new troops to Syracuse and prepare for another attack. The numbers he brings back now effectively make Demosthenes' reinforcements irrelevant. The Syracusans and Peloponnesians have a significantly larger force now, and more are joining their side as it looks like they're going to win. And so, flushed with troops, Gylippus decides to launch another double assault by land and sea because it's worked well for him before. Arguably, this is interesting because, again, we see the Spartans adapting away from traditional hoplite warfare, admittedly using someone else's navy, but they're thinking about it really more carefully. So Gylippus is victorious at sea, but he fails to break the Athenian defences. He still can't push through. He's still unable to really break the Athenian force there and then. But to some extent it doesn't matter. Demosthenes now realises that this is it. He's got to get out now. He recognises the position the Athenians are in as the positions he had the Spartans in at Pylos and Sphacteria when they were forced to surrender. He knows now is the time to get out. And following this double-pronged attack by Gylippus, we see the retreat from these fortifications. Now, arguably, this Athenian retreat is as important, if not more significant, than the long drawn-out siege. When the priests finally are convinced, probably at spear point, that it is safe to do so, the Athenians leave their fortifications and they're forced to head west to try and find a friendly local town where they can rest, ready for a final retreat from Sicily. And they leave in two divisions. One is led by Demosthenes, the other is led by Nicias. When they leave, they're forced to abandon the majority of their supplies, so they are setting off very poorly supplied, still carrying their weapons, but ultimately suffering the effects of a long drawn-out conflict. They will be weary, they will be tired, many will be suffering from wounds and so on. As they retreat across Sicily, and bear in mind we're now into the early spring summer months of the year, and Sicily is notoriously hot then, hot and dry, they are continually attacked and harassed by Syracusan forces pursuing them. The first division, led by Demosthenes, is the first to be overcome. They're attacked, routed and effectively surrender to the Syracusans. But they are the luckier ones. The second division, led by Nicias, managed to continue and they effectively come to a river crossing. Because of the extreme thirst, the heat and so on, Nicias' men, when they see this river, break rank and all just pile into the river. And we're told that while they're fighting each other in the river, everyone wanting to drink first, they're slaughtered in the riverbed. We're told they're fighting over each other to drink from the water that's already been soiled with the bloods of their friends. The pursuing Syracusans continue this assault until finally Nicias surrenders, realising that if he doesn't, his entire force will be slaughtered there and then. So this final slaughter in this riverbed is the last real action of not only the siege of Syracuse but the whole Sicilian campaign. Both Demosthenes and Nicias are executed by the Syracusans. Gylippus favoured using them as hostages, according to some sources, but he's overruled. 7,000 Athenian prisoners are held prisoner in a quarry for up to 70 days, where many of them were told died from exposure. The remaining prisoners are then sold into slavery. All in all, by the end, the Athenians had committed 50,000 men and 200 of its ships to this campaign. This is almost half the resources of the entire Athenian Empire, and it's fair to say that by the end they had lost pretty much all of it. And it's not just the numbers they've lost. With this defeat as well, they've also lost a big chunk of their military and political leadership. Demosthenes, Nicias and Lamachus are all dead. Alcibiades, who effectively became the next Cleon, the next leader of Athens, he's gone, he's fled to Sparta, so there is a significant vacuum in the Athenian military but also political leadership. And it's fair to say that when the news reaches Athens of what's happening, the reaction is one of shock and horror. Rather than bolstering their ability to continue fighting the Peloponnesians, the Sicilian expedition has effectively crippled them. The dominant faction in the Athenian Senate, however, pick up very quickly and immediately send out new demands to rebuild their now tattered fleet, build new ships and recruit and arm more men. Because this is quite a quick turnaround, it's Athenian aristocrats and oligarchs who are meant to foot this bill, and they are less than happy about this. As a result, there's a mini revolt in the aristocracy. Many of them particularly favour saving their wealth rather than victory over Sparta. They're thinking very short term, very immediate, and quite selfishly. They would rather keep all of their money than spend it on protracting this, what is now seen as a futile, almost unwinnable war. Now, even though this little revolt, this almost a coup, is short-lived, it definitely damages Athens' will and their ability to continue the war. Yes, the oligarchs briefly wrest back control from the Democratic Senate, but this is not sustained. But what we see with the Sicilian expedition is this is definitely a step closer to the end for the Athenians. So there you have it, the failed siege of Syracuse and the collapse of the Sicilian expedition. We'll do more analysis of the outcome, particularly in the Sicilian expedition part 3, but in the meantime, thanks for listening. I hope it's useful, informative and not too dull. As always, leave a comment below. Goodbye.